thank you for being there like a mom and supporting me through some of the toughest times. You will be missed.
This surprise party in 2019 was the last birthday Jonathan Farrington spent with his beloved mother, Dawn, before she embarked on a new life.
My mom was, to put it simply, my best friend.
Dawn lived apart from her husband, Frank Galenchen, for a decade. While she worked at a long-term care home in Oshawa, Ontario, he built their retirement home in the beautiful seaside village of Portapique, Nova Scotia. When she retired, they were finally together, living their dream.
When she got down there, you know, as hard as it was for all of us, it was the best moment of her life, I'm sure.
But that moment didn't last. Less than a year later, tragedy struck. Good evening. Thank you for joining us on what has been an incredibly difficult and tragic day in Nova Scotia and in the Maritimes. On the night of April 18th, Frank and Dawn Galenchen were murdered. Their future and their dream home torched.
A nightmare, you know. It's, again, I haven't come to terms with it. I can honestly say today's probably been the first day that it's actually hit me.
The loss of his mother hit hard on this particular day, which would have been her 63rd birthday. Jonathan, his fiancée Abigail Thompson, and his adopted sister Trisina Arnold spent it sharing memories and regrets.
You just wish you talked more and texted more and visited more.
A few mementos, notes of condolence from Canadians, and the couple's ashes are all the family has left. Everything else was incinerated in the house fire in Portapique.
I'm a firm believer that she's with us now and getting more positive energy to do it, and, you know, to tell the story of her life and my dad's life.
So many questions remain unanswered about how a single gunman could roam freely to burn, to kill so many for so long. 22 people were massacred in 13 hours.
They got the killer right here. They got him on lockdown. They're going for him right now. They got the killer right here.
The rampage finally ended when Mounties ran into the murderer at this gas station by chance and killed him. Criticism of the RCMP response came almost immediately. One of the most persistent questions is why they didn't do more to warn the public.
It's very vague what's going on down there, but there is for sure multiple patients down there.
RCMP arrived in Portapique at 10:26 on the night of April 18th, but the only alert that night was a vague tweet about a firearms complaint. What's more, the RCMP didn't tell Nova Scotians who their suspect was until the next morning, but radio communications show they had that information in the early hours of their investigation.
Mission here is to contain the area and locate and arrest our suspect in this. Our suspect is Gabriel Wortman.
In fact, a wounded witness had told Mounties almost immediately when they first arrived on scene he had been shot by a man named Gabe, and that the suspect was driving what looked like a police car.
Saying they don't know, they didn't know till 6 a.m. who the shooter was. Meanwhile, you know, there's a victim that told them, you know, at 10:30 in the evening who the suspect was.
In the days that followed the shootings, RCMP offered contradictory information or none at all. On April 20th, this was the response to questions about why the province's emergency alert system wasn't used.
It's a good question, and I don't have an answer for you at this moment.
Then they claimed Twitter was a more effective way of alerting people that there was a mass murderer on the loose.
We had relied on Twitter, as my colleague said, because of its the instantaneous manner that we can communicate.
Say their tweet alone, you know? Where's their accountability for that? What 62-year-olds are on Twitter?
On April 22nd, here's how police addressed questions about why the public wasn't notified earlier that the killer was impersonating a police officer.
The information about the vehicle, the clothing, took some time to learn from the one witness.
Then, a couple days later, a completely different answer.
Fairly early into our involvement, we learned of a possible suspect and learned the individual lived in a home within that same community in Portapique.
There is perhaps no better example of the RCMP's fractured response and lack of accountability than what happened at this fire hall on the morning of April 19th.
I heard shots, and then the wife started screaming.
Pat McCabe and his wife live next door to the fire hall, which was designated as a refuge for people fleeing Portapique. They saw an unmarked RCMP vehicle arrive, and then chaos.
2 people got out, one on each side of the car, left the doors open, and they started shooting from the road.
The gunfire sent an emergency management office employee scrambling for cover. By sheer luck, bullets missed him and missed an RCMP car stationed in the parking lot with a Mountie sitting inside. Either of them, or others in the area, could have easily been killed.
What I can do is I can provide you with some general comments.
For months, police declined to answer questions about what happened at the fire hall pending an investigation. When the report was finally released in February, it made clear that police were totally unprepared to deal with a suspect who was dressed like them. Their radios weren't working, and rather than wait for more information, officers started yelling at the man they saw in the parking lot and then opened fire. The report found the communication issues that morning were due to the heavy volume of radio traffic. It also found the officers had reasonable grounds to think they saw the gunman in the parking lot and fired to stop him. No charges were laid, and the RCMP will only say they're looking into the radio problem. It's been more than 10 months since the RCMP has answered questions about the shootings. In December, they did charge Gabriel Wortman's common-law partner, Lisa Banfield, her brother, James Banfield, and brother-in-law, Brian Brewster, with illegally transferring ammunition to the killer. But RCMP claimed they didn't know what Wortman was going to do on the weekend of the shootings. Jonathan Farrington and his fiancée say police continue to keep them in the dark.
Just literally almost everything regarding this case I've got from social media.
From the get-go, I don't think they've actually ever told us information that we haven't already heard.
It took 11 months for the Nova Scotia government to finally introduce legislation to make it illegal for people to own police equipment like cars and uniforms. So far, that is the only thing the province has done. But there was a response from the federal government.
Last week, 22 Canadians were killed in the deadliest rampage in our country's history.
Only days after the Nova Scotia massacre, Prime Minister Justin Trudeau used Nova Scotia's tragedy to announce a long-promised piece of gun control legislation.
Today, we are closing the market for military-grade assault weapons in Canada.
It seemed like a pledge finally fulfilled to victims' families and survivors of another horrific mass shooting.
This is, I am told, the worst shooting disaster in Canadian history.
Those who escaped the infamous Polytechnic massacre have been pushing for stronger gun laws ever since a shooter murdered 14 women at the Montreal school in 1989. And there is a chilling connection to Nova Scotia.
One of the things that we learned after the Nova Scotia shooting was that the gunman in that case had a Ruger Mini 14 that he used, the same weapon that was used in Polytechnic 31 years ago now. Well, how do you feel knowing that?
You cannot imagine how mad I am.
Natalie Provost was shot 4 times at Polytechnic, but survived. She understands better than most the heavy toll of gun violence.
I remember seeing the eyes of one of my friends closing and understanding that it was really, really dangerous, that it was the end for her. I have very, very profound wounds that I was able to overcome, but never totally. They are in me for my whole life.
The Liberals' 2019 election platform also included a pledge to buy back all military-style assault rifles. But when they introduced Bill C-21, the buyback was voluntary.
And I think that's a betrayal.
Polytechnic survivors like Heidi Rathjen were outraged.
As long as these weapons are still out there, accessible, they can be used by their owners, they can be stolen and used.
The Prime Minister has made a habit of attending memorials for the victims of the Polytechnic massacre, but now survivors say he's no longer welcome.
The families that I've spoken with over the last year of the victims in Nova Scotia, the people who witnessed it, a lot of them are expressing frustration with police and with politicians over what they say is a lack of accountability and a lack of answers. What do you think when you hear that?
People in Nova Scotia have a right to be angry, to be frustrated of what happened, of our law, of our regulation. I really can't understand them.
And that lack of accountability seems to permeate every level of government. In February, Nova Scotia's outgoing Premier, Stephen McNeil, bid farewell with a familiar talking point.
The inquiry, I'm sure, is going to bring us recommendations, things that will have to change.
That inquiry is only happening because enraged Nova Scotians demanded it. They'll have to wait until at least 2022 for answers, because they aren't getting them from the new premier.
There's so many things we can do, I believe, and there is an independent inquiry that will go over everything from top to bottom that involves different levels of government.
That's not good enough for those left to pick up the pieces like Jonathan Farrington. He knows nothing will bring back his mother and father, but after a year of waiting for answers, his faith in the entire system is gone.
My trust in the inquiry and my trust in the RCMP as a whole, there's none.
He's part of a proposed class action lawsuit against the Mounties and the government of Nova Scotia. After the murder of Jonathan's parents, first responders in Ontario paid tribute in a memorial procession. A show of solidarity that he says gives him more comfort than anything the RCMP have done.
It's just, they seem untouchable. It's just, they don't have to provide anything to us. So you just sum it up as lives are lost, shooter's gone. To me, it just feels like everything's just being swept under the carpet, and hey, you know what? We expect the families to move on with life, fingers crossed kind of thing.